Thank you so much for being here. I hope we have some men as well. Good, great. Thank you for being here. My name is Paula, and I'm here with Alessia and the great panel, like a Dream panel. I will let Alessia start with a presentation about some numbers, some hard data, and we then going to go into strategic conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. So I represent here the European Women's Audiovisual Network. EWA Network published 2 years ago a research report on the career of women directors in Europe, and that's why Laurence and Francesco came to see me during Berlinale, and they were pretty sure that we would have data on women in TV series. And I was kind of, no, we don't have data on women in TV series. And they asked, can you provide some? I said, okay, let's try to collect some data and see what is happening in this part of the audiovisual industry. We started, since this is in the context of a dialogue between the US and Europe, we started looking for data in the US, and we found out some general data on women in TV shows. So we found a report of the Directors Guild of America. This report tracks employment by TV studios, and this is a reflection of hiring statistics of the 8 largest TV studios. All in all, over the period 2015 and 16, women directed 17% of all episodes, and within those, only 3% of episodes were directed by women of color. Then we found out another study done by the San Diego University. This is a study tracking women representation in primetime TV, dramas, comedies, reality programs. So again, we don't have any specific data about TV series. This study has been going on for 10 years now, so it's very comprehensive because it covers the presence of women in front of the camera and also behind the camera. In front of the camera, it covers the presence of women and men, but also the diversity of the representation within female characters. I know this is a very boring exercise, so I leave you reading the data. For me, the most interesting aspect of this study is the gender stereotyping, which is something which is very, very similar also to cinema. So we have female characters always younger than men, and the roles played by women are essentially those of wives and mothers, and women are less seen in working environment than men. Behind the camera, we have an interesting data. Women are 28% of all creators, directors, writers, producers, of all, female staff working in TV. And also, no progress seems to have been made in the past decade. At the same time, when there is a woman in a key position, it can be observed that there are more women present in the cast. Then we go to showrunners. For showrunners, we found out only an article published by Variety. The information is provided by the 5 major broadcast networks in the US. It is an article covering a larger scope. It is not only about the proportion of men and women, but if we go to the second We have out of 50 showrunners, we have only 11, so 22% of women. Again, this is a very small sample. We don't know exactly what is happening at large, but I think we can take it as quite realistic. Maybe our panelists can tell us more about that. Just to go quickly. Now, Europe. In Europe, we have even less data because we have one report done in Germany, published in 2017, and this report is based only on public service commissioned and in-house fiction productions, and it covers the two main German public channels. I mean, it's a very comprehensive study, but again, it doesn't go into the TV series, and we can see that we have a lot of women in costume, and then it goes down to sound, 3%, and this is more or less also comparable to what happens in cinema, in feature films production. Then we have another German study. This is more based on content. It's a private foundation which has examined public and private TV dramas. And again, the proportions are very sad in terms of numbers, but what is striking also, they examined children TV, and in children TV, 1 out of 4 characters is a female, and it gets even worse when it's about imaginary characters and fantasy characters. So animals are mostly male. Then we have another study, which is a bit older. This is a French study. CSA is the Conseil supérieur de l'Audiovisual, the French Audiovisual Regulatory Authority. And in 2013, they analyzed 26 TV fiction, 13 US and 13 French. And they analyzed the context, so the presence of characters, and they found out some differences between the US, where there were less women characters than in France, but when you go to the lead characters, the difference is not so big. We also wanted to have a look really more focused on showrunners. As I said, we found out only an article by Variety, but we also consider that what is new in the TV series environment comes really from the women showrunners. We took very, very few examples. I'm afraid we couldn't go through all the women showrunners. So I'm going very quickly on this, and I would like to go actually to the end of our small presentation, because for us what was clear, though the data, again, I insist on that, the data are not comprehensive. So first of all, we think we need more data, because we have seen that in cinema, to move the lines, we needed the data. Since our studies, since our research, public institutions are moving in Europe, and it has become a real issue. So this is the first point. Secondly, the good news is that when there are more women in key position behind the camera, there are also a movement, a positive movement. So more women are taken on board. And also there are more female characters in the content. So this is a trend. And also we know, but this is not based on hard evidence, but we all know that innovations in the way female characters are represented are coming from women showrunners. And those innovations are more complex lead female characters, realistic representations of women's sexuality and sexual violence, and increasing, all in all, presence of women characters in TV series. I live, I don't know how to go back to the main screen, but...
So there is another thing to come after this, so don't worry.
Okay. So this is all. It's not much. I have more background information if you need it. So I'm available. If you come and see me, I can provide both with this presentation and the information it was based on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessia. Thank you so much. Let's move over here. So Caroline, would you like to join in a bit closer? So this is going to be my first question, right? Women, we're very familiar with this effect, I think. And the fact that sometimes women do break through and they appear and they are successful in telling our stories and the stories of the world, because after all, we are 51% of the population of the world, not even 50 anymore. It's a really important... It's good. Percentages are very good because they actually break the barrier, and the data that Alessia was reclaiming, they break the barrier of what are our ideas of what it is. And then you have the data that shows that sometimes we believe, oh, there are a lot of women in this scenario, and actually the data shows you that they're not. So perceptions are good to contrast, I think. So I would like to start with Caroline and your, I know in France they have this 50-50 idea for, going back to the data, they have this 50-50 idea for women in the industry. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I'm very happy to be able to speak about this initiative that has been launched by a bunch of very young women that are really an example for our generation, which I blame partly for having been so passive for many years, because we were not that outspoken about this women issue and gender issue and equality. We took it for granted when it was not granted at all. And what happened in France was quite spectacular, because it was a complicated backdrop where there was a very mixed response within the film industry, and I would say also in the TV industry, but more the film industry, related to the Weinstein, thing and the Me Too wave, the scandal. Obviously, nothing concrete has come out of it. We were not shaken at all by it. There was not major scandal revelation. It was like extremely quiet. We were waiting for something to happen, and nothing happened. So I think the origin of the 50-50 2020 launch was basically to say we have to do something. We have to try to change things. And let's not talk anymore about feelings. Let's talk about data. And all those numbers were extremely interesting, but we don't have them in France, or we don't have them as detailed in France. So basically the idea was to seize the moment in a positive way. Let's not get too passionate about the debate, especially in a country like France, and try to structure a reflection around the question of inequalities and distribution of power within the film industry. But for me now, and for all of us, it started with the film industry, but now both industries are so incredibly linked that I think we can, hopefully will widen up to the TV industry as well. And the point was to question the distribution of power, believing that the equality is going to restore quite naturally the balance of power, which is something that we feel is very important, and also link that to diversity, because this is also an issue that we haven't been facing in France at all in our industries. So the two things that we are aiming at with this movement is to first challenge our cultural institutions. think it's very important because they are leading the way to this new world hopefully happening. And the aim is to have equal directorial boards by 2020. Public institutions, private entities, professional unions, festival, jury, film schools, TV schools, and expects the decision makers at the head of those entities to cultivate this awareness that had not been happening in our industry. And the second thing is to create an observatory to monitor equality in the industry. And the point is to produce, again, those numbers, to analyze the statistics in the French industry in order to promote public awareness around those questions. So that has been launched a few months ago. We are already 600 signatories. We are really aiming at getting to the 1,000 numbers. We are really hoping you all go on the internet, on the website, which is 52/2020, and please join us.
The website is 50502020.com?
Yeah. Well, you will find it.
Okay.
Hopefully you will find it.
50502020. Go sign. Good.
And there will be also a big initiative during the Cannes Film Festival that you will hear about that will be really launching in the face of the world this initiative and showing that France is not only on the past but also aiming at some future changes.
Beautiful. And before I get to the showrunners, I want to stay with the 50-50 because Sweden is Anna Serner, amazing initiatives in cinema. What happens to TV, and what happens to your perception of that 50-50?
I guess that was the reason I was here. No, Sweden has been on the forefront of this. We started out in 2000. I think the Swedish government decided that the Swedish Film Institute needed to do, statistics on writers, directors, and producers. And since then, this thing has been evolving, of course, and the head of the Swedish Film Institute has been pushing this quite far. Many people have been very upset, sometimes even myself, but that has been a matter of how you do it, because you can come to, you can get the right statistics, but, maybe not the... I don't know how to say that. But what has happened is, I'm really happy about the work she's done, of course. In 2016, we had 50-50 producer, writer, directors. And everyone was saying that the quality was going to go down, the box office numbers were going to go down on the women projects, which was absolute nonsense, of course. Didn't happen. Great reviews, great numbers at the box office. So you can do it by saying it. But I think counting is essential to have the data, because the data tells you how bad it is.
So go into the data, even though in America we have cases like the fantastic shows that both Sarah and Veena have done and have provided us with, I think we have seen from Alessia's data that that's no paradise. I mean, we have been kicked out of paradise so long ago. So my question to you will be, well, first of all, going to Animals and Fantasy, I'm very interested in the group that you have created, the showrunner group that's called the Wolfpack. So the 50 showrunners that belong to the group get together maybe once a year, but you still have each other, is a network of super powerful showrunners. So how did it come about, and how does it work? I know you're both part of that group, so whoever wants to go first, I would love to hear about that.
Well, I joined the Wolfpack a few years ago, and it was already up and running. And I don't know whose brainstorm it was.
I think it was the Humanitas Prize. They wanted to make fellowships for female screenwriters. They were asking us to contribute in the beginning. It was like a fundraiser.
Right, yeah. And support female writers. And from that grew this organization of women showrunners, about 40 to 50 of us, and we meet maybe once a year, and we just have each other's emails. So we have this affinity group for supporting each other, you know, getting together, talking about the nuts and bolts battles that we go through, running our shows, dealing with the networks and the studios, and our staff. Who's the best PR person? Do you have an assistant? You know, all the ups and the downs. And then just having a forum to do this, you know, on a regular basis with our co-conspirators in an industry that has been very slow to recognize us.
One example that I was giving earlier was that this group has been incredibly helpful for was when I had my second child while I was running the show, and it was hard to negotiate for maternity leave and things like that, because it was somewhat unprecedented at my network, at least, for a showrunner to have a kid in the middle of production. And so another woman in the group got pregnant the next year. And so she emailed me and called and said, I know you've been through this. Can you tell me what you did with your network and what you asked for so I can ask for it with my network? And I think that was a really concrete example of how that group has been, you know, just incredibly beneficial to us, because there are some just things that we go through as women that men don't ever have to deal with, and being able to go to each other for precedent and counsel on that has been great.
I think it's like a dream for a European setting, because we are good at creating these big networks, but actually the nitty-gritty networks where we can lean on, for women, there is Eva, and that has been the most enriching experience, I think, in the last couple of years. We just started a mentorship program and things like that, but there are not so many forums where we can actually collaborate. So it's really good to know that even at a certain top level, you needed this collaboration, this leaning on, to take that word. But so can you tell us a bit of how many women in this room are either wannabe showrunners, producers who write, writers who want to produce? Can I have the words, the hands up? A lot. Great. So it's been really hard for them, I'm absolutely sure. In Europe, the idea of a showrunner is not as established. There are some women breaking through here and there. We don't have a clear way of how we go through the stairs and how we enter. Suddenly, film directors become showrunners the next day, and we are told that maybe cinema is totally different. And so there is this crisscross that is not quite happening in full. So I would like to know, what are your strategies and what were your starting points in your careers, and how did you manage to ease through in a way? The word probably is not ease, but to wave through.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing in the States. I think that there's more of a system, because it's a little bit of, you know, like the military. There's the writers' rooms, which are pretty common in the States, and you start out as a staff writer, you go all the way up to, you know, EP, and you move up the ranks, you know, year by year. You're promoted or fired or whatever. And then statistically, too, we're starting to notice in the States, which is really, really interesting, that younger, newer writers of color, male and female, are being asked back because of the structural changes, going from 24 episodes per year per season to now the 10 episodes, 12 episodes. Male and female writers of color are being asked back as staff writers, sometimes 3 years in a row, where actually you should be
being promoted.
Right. So there's some wiggle room within the system to continue to discriminate, you know, based on diversity and certainly gender. But ultimately, there is somewhat of a system that should not have a glass ceiling. Clearly from the numbers, it still does. Clearly from the rooms that do not represent, you know, the population as it is in the States, there's discrimination, but at least there's some modicum of how you can move up. For me, I became incredibly lucky. My first show as a staff writer was with a female showrunner. And there was an immediate creative affinity between us for the show, for the lead character, who was a female, who was one of the first females, and this was in 2002, who was, it was cold case, and she was a police officer, but there was no bikinis required of her. She didn't have to sexualize looking at lab results. There was just, she just did her job. And she wore a suit, as most people who work in the police force do as detectives. So I got really lucky to actually be working on a show. Granted, it was network, not really my sensibility, but it was very much, you know, a show run by a woman who wanted to represent women as they really are. Very successful show. It was part of the Bruckheimer franchise. And, you know, within 3 years of moving up the system, I was a pretty low-level writer still. Meredith Steam decided to leave the show, and she asked me to take over. And it was shocking, you know, to me and to my male cohorts who were higher level writers than I, that I would be asked to do that. And Meredith just made a really good point. She said it's not rocket science, you know, it's a ton of Uber management, it's a ton, but the most important thing is you can write the show. You know, that is the most important thing to actually show run. And so I got very lucky. It felt like this incredible fast track. It was exceptional, you know, and I credit that really to having a woman, you know, as my boss who saw my talent and not my gender. So I got really lucky. And I want to also say, though, that when I came into the industry with my other, you know, colleagues who are women, we were all kind of younger, emerging writers. You know, I would hear stories like one of my friends was in a writer's room. Most rooms at that point, and still today, are mostly male. And it was a really kind of shitty, dumb show that she was on. And her showrunner was just kind of a jerk, was a big jerk. And she was just sitting there, and, you know, it's very important, you know, as you guys know who've been in writers' rooms, that you have to pitch, right? That's how you get, you know, promoted, that's how you get recognized, that's how you get to write a script, that's how, blah. And so she was, you know, avidly pitching one day. Well, first of all, the writer's room would spend, you know, half the time you're sitting there making, like, jokes and bullshitting with each other, because that is a necessary element, you know, of the room, is to feel comfortable. But their jokes were a game, and I'm sorry to use this language, but it was called Fuck, Marry, Kill. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this game. I never heard of it, and I was just blown away when I heard of it. The male writers would play the game, Fuck, Marry, Kill, and it would be like, let's look at all the female actresses on our show, and who would you rather fuck, who would you want to marry, and who would you want to kill? And this is like
a Facebook origin.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, like, how this is appropriate to talk about, you know, as adults. And it got to the point where they would look at her, their colleague, a writer, and be like, hey guys, let's play it with her. And so in this environment, she's trying to show up as an adult and do her job. And she's pitching, you know, one day pitching, you know, this idea, baby writer, trying to make her boss give her an episode. And he's looking at her and he's like, can you just for a second, just like bend over for a second. And so she bends over, and he takes his Diet Coke, and he puts it on the back of her head, and he says, you are the perfect woman, because I can put my scotch on the back of your head while you're giving me a blowjob. So this happens. I mean, this is, again, like, I'm very happy to talk about my experience as a woman who came up in the industry with a female showrunner, and that's the example I want to be for other women in the industry, but this is the industry that we work in. So, on that note.
I mean, we all go, but we have some stories. We all do. This is the craziest bit. Sarah, do you want to share a bit how it went for you? How it just...
Because I'm having post-traumatic stress now from Veena's stories. So I had a different path than Veena. I started out as a playwright. And I had actually only, in America, they're very different industries. They're on very different coasts. So, and especially now the theater people are kind of coming west, and actually a lot of my friends and colleagues from theater are now running their own shows. But when I came out west, it was quite rare to have made that switch. And I had never watched TV. I didn't like TV. It wasn't my plan for myself. But I came out to do this little show called In Treatment, which was very play-like. It was very theatrical because there's just two people in a room talking. And I was very good at it. So I stayed. But one thing that I think was actually quite helpful for me is that I had gone to Yale Drama School. I had had years to develop basically a voice of my own that was important to me. And because I wanted to be a playwright, what was most important to me was just basically to tell my stories and to be able to articulate, what was in my heart and in my head. And that was more important to me than anything else. So I think it was a bit of a saving grace for me in a very male-dominated industry because I didn't care that much in the beginning as to whether or not I was successful or advanced. I actually used to joke that television was my day job and I was just doing it to make money so I could go back to New York and do theater, subsidize my theater career. And I used to sort of promise myself that I would quit as soon as I started to care because I do think it's an industry that really kind of eats people alive, and especially women. Less so now, but at the time it was. But I was very ballsy in these male-dominated writers' rooms because I cared more about the work than I cared about anything else. And I think they weren't really used to it when I started. They usually they were used to writers, like younger writers, being really deferential to the showrunners because they wanted to succeed and to be promoted. And for some reason, I just wasn't. And I look back and I think, oh God, I was just crazy. Like I was insane, and I would never be as brave now as I was then. But I think in a lot of ways, like I have this one memory of actually being on In Treatment at the very beginning, and I was having this argument with the showrunner, and there was a guy sitting in the corner in like a baseball cap with high tops and jeans, and I was really getting into it with the showrunner, like that's ridiculous, she wouldn't do that, you can't make her do that, there's no arc there, blah blah, whatever it was. I think he had cut a line about a dog, and I was like, the dog is the whole point of this episode. And there's this guy sitting in the corner of the table who I have no idea who he is, and he's just laughing, and he thinks, and he's clapping, and I was like, who's that asshole, and why is he at our table read? And it turns out it was the executive producer. And I had no idea. So I think in that way, just being able to have a lot of confidence as a woman and have a real voice as a woman really young helped me survive some of these really crazy experiences. I've been in all male writers' rooms as well. I remember, and the thing that's frustrating and demoralizing, sometimes there's just out and out sexism, and you gotta, coming in, they say you have to tell us who you fucked last night, you have to tell us who you're sleeping with, we need it for our story, so that itself, you're a young woman and you're with all men is harrowing enough, but sometimes it was actually just it was very demoralizing the way that they treated and thought of female characters, so over and over again, you're trying to bring your own experience and your own perception of yourself into these characters, and they're I just remember this one show where the men would just keep taking all the agency away from the female lead and giving it to either her boyfriend or her boss. So she could not buy pillows unless somebody told her to, and then they were like, Treem, you're here. They called me my last name, so they said, Treem, what the fuck? This, this woman has she's got no character. You're here to make her character. She doesn't want anything. She doesn't. And I was like, right, because we won't let her have any agency. We won't let her care about anything. And they were like, well, she's confused. And I was like, yeah, I understand that she's confused, but still, she needs to want something. I mean, everybody wants something. If you don't want something, you're dead. Yeah, you're not alive. It's kind of character 101. And they kind of looked around and they were like, well, we don't want her to come across as a cunt. And that itself was just, I remember I went outside and I called, apropos of your show, I called my agent, who's a woman, who's my age. And I was like, I quit, I can't do this anymore. And she was so smart at the time, I remember, because this was almost 10 years ago now, so this was, and I actually do think our industry has changed a lot, because of people like Veena, who were real trailblazers for female showrunners. But I remember calling my agent and saying, I can't do this anymore. And she was like, this is not the last show you're ever gonna be on. We'll get you out of this, but just get yourself back in there and survive it. Don't quit. And And that was the best piece of advice I have ever gotten in my entire career. And that's the only piece of advice I think there is to give. It's just like, just don't quit. Because, you know, they'll do a lot to make you try to quit, you know, sort of consciously, unconsciously.
Yeah.
But if you don't quit.
Yeah. I think a lot of female wannabe showrunners are on the way of being a breaking through showrunner or whichever step in Europe, for example, we say, they will dream of, I called my agent and my agent told me. Like those things, like we have all these very looser structures yet. I mean, the UK is better at having a similar structure to the US, which is why probably the combination is more successful there as well. My question to the producer is, when it's blunt, when it's sexism, when we put the scotch in the back, it's easy. But how do you check on yourself that we have to be part of this change? We have to push more of the stories. We have to look at the interlining. We have to look at all those women taking a bath and smudging lipstick in their face when they are feeling confused, which are things that we don't really do. So, right? And we don't take those many baths, right? We don't swim when we are confused and anguished and smudge the lipstick when we feel like really, really confused. No. So, but those things are there, and they're there, and they seem normal. And they are part of the culture, so what's the protocol of checking into our unconscious biases of 5,000 years of
That's
patriarchy?
a huge pressure on my shoulder to answer that question without, answering on a very intimate level. But the only thing I can relate with is my own experience as a woman in this industry since more than 20 years. I think, and my partner, Carol Scotta, and our company, which is, there are some men, but mainly women, it's not something we decided to do. We just didn't sit, one day in a room saying we have to force, gender equality and this company has to be, 50-50. This was something very natural. And now that I recall all those years, the only thing I remember is the fact that we never let the fact of being a woman stand in the way of anything we wanted to do. And I think it has been a kind of very unconscious process that was a matter probably of survival. And when I was asked to participate to this conversation today, I felt almost bad because I thought I don't have enough thinking about this question because I have been through it, I have lived it. I think in the choices we made, the fact that we were women was very constantly present, but it was not something that we fought for. It was very natural. And when, of course, it happened, I mean, I have to say that the experience you are telling us about are totally frightening for me. And I am even more surprised to hear them than clearly for us, the TV world has been profoundly shaken by the image of women brought by the American series. So what's amazing is the fact that you had to fight the experiences you are just telling us about, but to end up with such amazing, complex, dislikable woman, which is, I think, has been something brought up by American series in a way that was wonderful and totally new. Those women didn't need to be likable in order to be liked. They could be dislikable. And I think this complexity was brought up, obviously, by women like you working in this industry and fighting your way through. But to come back on our experience, and I want to say also something that came to mind. I realized that all this Weinstein scandal happened around cinema because cinema is essentially built on the star system. TV is not, or much less. And I think there is actually a way that TV could do a work, an underground work that was going much deeper into reflecting the progress of our societies. TV has been always much more progressive on the psychological side, political side, cultural side, in many ways compared to cinema.
Yeah, but yet we have heads of TV channels that are very linked to politics, and politics is mainly male. And those male boards are extremely male in all the TV channels, or most TV channels in Europe.
I am not saying that this should not change. It definitely has to change, especially in Europe. But what we witnessed in the past 15 years, and it started a long time ago, after the wave of difficult men, and starting, I guess, with girls, more or less, it was a wave of not even those difficult women, it was just real women. And it came from the US, it didn't come from elsewhere, and a bit from the UK. And we are so, late as far as we are concerned.
I was telling Sarah that I think that the US has a lot to really not only show us, but also they could really help even the advanced, the little more advanced that they have compared to Europe, for us is gigantic on learning strategies or having this passage of knowledge. And Anna, for you as a broadcaster, how do you approach this quota idea and going back to the nuances and not just staying on the blunt sexist shows? Now, of course, you see them, you may not want them, but what happens when the lines need to be a bit more complex?
I think, well, the first thing I did when I started was to, start counting. How has it been over the years, and how is it now? How is it going to be next year? And what kind of stories are we telling? So who's the lead actor? I mean, is it a woman or a man? I mean, looking at the stories as well.
Consciously.
But, yeah, consciously. I myself have been a producer for 20 years. I've worked almost only with women, and that has not been, I don't think it has been a conscious choice for me. I think, men pick men and women, some women pick women. It's not like women are going to change that. But I'm certainly, I'm really aware of this question, and I am going to work really hard to get, female writers and directors. We don't have the showrunner system, or we don't work that way, but the way we work, we can always, do this. We can do the same thing with the head writers, and who owns the projects and which stories are being told. So I think, I think it's a decision, someone has to make. Either it's it's about, it's about role models as well. I mean, if you need to have the good example. I produced a feature film like a year ago that was a big box office hit. That was with a female writer team and a female director, and that's a really good thing for the industry to see that you can make it. You don't have to sort of pinch those silly balloons that says, women can't do this. But you have to have the good examples. You have to have role models. You have to have, women leading the way. And as a decision maker at the broadcaster, I can sort of make women lead the way.
When you have power, you can. Yeah. It's been proven in the numbers that if a woman has power and brings on other women, then that opens the line a lot more. And of course,
the thing that you're talking about is, I think that's essential to moving things forward.
Yeah. Do you feel that responsibility as showrunners yourselves?
100%, yeah. And I just want to say, too, that none of this is an act of charity, right? None of this is like, oh, let me open the door just because. It's like, if I want diversity in terms of great storytelling and great characters and as much richness as possible, on the screen, whether it's a director or I look at the work, and I look if I want great. My best male characters are written by women. We're capable of doing work. I hate to just. It seems so bizarre to say this, but women can be as, if not more, but certainly as competent as artists as men can be. So none of this is about charity. It's simply finding who's the best person out there and then leveling the playing field for women and for people of color. And as a woman of color, it is my responsibility, absolutely, to not be like, oh, well, I don't know. It's like, no, I know that I have been looked at over and over and over again as not competent when I know I am. And a woman looked at me and said, I will look at you for your talent. So absolutely, it's my responsibility in, you know, every single department that I have control over, you know, from my crew to my directors to my writers to my cast, to say, you know, I'm going to find, and I tell stories about women, you know, I do. So, yeah, absolutely. And again, it's not charity, it is simply finding the best people out there. And I feel like we're being, you know, our industry definitely is, I mean, Shonda showed it, you know, with her shows, that, and Lee Daniels showed it with his show, that there is a hunger for great storytelling, and our industry is far behind our population. Our audience and our country is far more advanced than our industry, which looks like Mad Men. You know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I completely agree with Veena. In our industry, the writers are producers in television. That's basically how it works. They're not separate jobs. You start out as a staff writer, and as you get more experience, you could become a producer, and you start to produce the show, along with the showrunner, who is a writer. So I, for a long time, felt that I needed to have gender parity in my writer's room because it was a show that was told from a male and a female perspective. So I was really assiduous about making sure that it was half men and half women in my writer's room. And then, you know, so half male and half female producers. And then this past year, for some reason that wasn't because it wasn't a conscious decision, just, you know, some people left, some people came in, the scale tilted more to women for the first time, so more women in writing and producing roles, more women as department heads, just like my show became just much more female, and it was so much easier to make the show. I mean, it was amazing, actually. It was easier. I think the show is better, and I think that women, I mean, it's not charity, and I think that women work well together. You know, for us in these writer room environments, like, you know, I've been in writers' rooms that are more traditional, where everybody is basically jockeying, competing for ideas, competing for the approval of the showrunner, competing to be the loudest voice in the room. And that does not lend itself to the most complicated, dynamic storytelling, as when people are basically working as a team. And my room was always very I didn't believe in hierarchy in the room from the very beginning, so I never treated a staff writer differently than a co-executive producer, which again was not like necessarily a conscious decision. It's just that the team doesn't work well if everybody feels like they need to stay in their place, especially in a show where I'm asking people to bring their relationships and their vulnerability and these kind of secrets from their past into the room. It has to be a very safe room where everybody respects everybody. But when the room tilted more female, you know, there was just this like incredible generosity in the conversation that just made a much better show. So that was like kind of an interesting lesson for me, you know, because I was like, we must have half men, and then I was like, you know what, no, we don't. It's fine.
There are some
they're well represented in other places in the industry. It'll be okay.
Men. So it's super interesting. You're tapping into some of the. So we are up against culturally this idea that women don't collaborate and that we fight among each other. Like this idea in Europe is super, super pervasive for the culture. The idea that, you know, women don't, you know, oh, women bicker, women don't talk to. If you look at the Bechdel test and you go through the European films, like 90% of them don't pass it. Are you familiar with the Bechdel test? Raise your hands. Good. So they don't pass it, so women are not talking. But for those who are not, Bechdel test, two women, they talk to each other about something that is not a man. There are two women at least, and they have a name. That is not the mate. So we go against that. And then we also go against something that is super relevant right now about quotas. When it comes to quotas, we receive these stories about, oh, it's important about the talent. The talent is what's most important. But the selection of talent is not done from a robot. It's done from a person with a bias that thinks that the talent is male, that thinks that the master is male. My favorite story is the one that Anna always talks about, is the one about the orchestras, right? Blind orchestras auditions being done to get to parity, to get to 50-50. They don't happen. They don't happen the moment that not only blind, but without shoes. So you cannot really see if it's male or female, nor hear it, is where we got to parity. Because until then, the male mastery of music got into the bias, and the bias said, oh, that's women's shoes. That violinist was better than that. But the moment nobody could see the musician nor hear the steps, we got to 50-50 parity. So when we talk about talent, it's super important to say, oh, we didn't think of the gender, it was unconscious. Yes and no. We are all the time thinking of gender, even if we're not thinking. Everything is political, is gender in our unconscious, because it's 5,000 years of a patriarchal culture that has told us all these myths that we have to go down and really make it blind if we're going to talk about genderless and just talent. And it's very difficult to make it.
Yeah, and I think it's even beyond that. I think that the way that men and women tell narratives are inherently different, and so there's a kind of an understanding of like what's a good narrative, like a standard Aristotelian linear narrative with a inciting incident and a rising action and a catastrophe, like a basically like it's like sex for men. And then it's over, and then it goes away, and that seems to be like a successful story. Told from a male perspective, but I find that like a woman's life and a woman's narrative, it's just a different story, and that's something that I find I'm still struggling with as a storyteller in our industry, is just trying to like slowly kind of convince people that a story doesn't even necessarily have to be told in a classic linear way for it to be good, to be successful, and that's now you're talking about like thousands of years of conditioning. That you're sort of trying to somehow cut away at, but it's quite unconscious.
We have just 5 minutes, so I am going to ask each one of them to give the audience some tip or some ideas on how to continue, or some last reflection. Caroline?
Well, I think the doors are opening quite widely now, and it's the time to seize it and not to let anything refrain you on anything in terms of, taking the power and just voicing things that have not been voiced up to now. And I'm going to use a word that is not very feminist, but I think it's becoming very sexy to become feminist again. And I think women have to not be afraid of, standing and joining each other, because this sorority, solidarity within frontiers and borders seem to be the answer. And mix it with diversity, which seems to be essential as well.
Okay. Veena.
I think we know this already as women who live in the world, but Sarah said it really beautifully. Don't quit. Work harder, be better, expect half, but don't quit. And that's okay, because you're pushing the ball up the field. Each and every one of us are pushing the ball absolutely up the field. And fight for each other, fight for each other, not because, again, it's charity, but because it's what's right and what's the best for your project. And for those of you who are in the midst of it already with your shows or pitching or going out, don't relent, because selling a show is one thing, sticking to the character as you imagined her or him is a whole other thing. So do not relent. You will not regret it. You will regret it if you give up on who you imagine her to be. And we're all in this fight together, women and men. Anna said it really beautifully. We are capable, our audiences are really smart and they're hungry. The money will be there, the numbers will be there. Let's just be brave, especially in this time we live in, especially in this world we live in now. We all need to be braver, than we have been in the past.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's really helping American television right now, there's all these shows where people are basically writing their own stories, and they're like Insecure, Atlanta. There are all these new shows where these writer creators are basically coming out and they're saying, I'm just going to tell you what it's like to be me, and the shows are brilliant and groundbreaking. So I would say there's something that I learned back at school, at drama school, where they were talking about having a healthy fuck you attitude, which means not take criticism. Obviously, you must take criticism, and you have to learn, and you have to be able to hear that and to grow. But at a certain point, you also have to say, this is me, this is my story, I'm the one who knows how to tell it, you can't tell it better than I can. And that, I think a tremendous amount of confidence comes out of that, this healthy fuck you attitude. And you know, that's a really brilliant place to start writing from. So I think it's important to find that and to protect it.
Anna.
I'd say find someone that you can collaborate with, because then you'll feel less lonely. And also don't quit, because we see that in the film schools, there's like 50-50 women and men, and where does the women sort of fall off? Don't do that. Stay in there. Hang on.
And I will close the panel thanking you all very much, and also saying the European Women Audiovisual Network is a super important space for networking, getting together. Sorority is key. And don't let Miss Trigg's treatment happen to you. Really fight for your ideas. If they are yours, they're yours. And don't be afraid at all to claim them. Good luck to everybody. Thank you very much.